Welcome to Podjunction podcast. I am Sadaf Beynon, and I'm here with Matt Edmundson, as always.
As always. The pain in my life, Matthew is here. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you at the show.
Yes, and so today, this episode is going to be a little bit different. We will be saying goodbye to this co-hosted format for this podcast, and we will be talking about what's changing, where we're heading, and so on.
So no clips in this.
So no clips. We're just gonna
me and Beynon, chatting away.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun. You're gonna have to explain to everybody why you fired me. In essence, is what's going to happen. At least this is what I'm hoping.
You get to watch it live.
Yeah, really sorry about
You're fired.
You're fired.
Always wanted to say that.
No, the actual story is when was it? 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you came to me and said, Matt, we need to change it. You no longer need to be on the podcast. I'm just going to do it myself. So I was like, okay.
Is that what you heard?
Yeah, tell me if it was actually different though.
Yeah, it was a bit different. A little bit.
Brilliant.
All right, so let's start with why we started doing it this way. Matt, why don't you talk to us about that?
So when we started Podjunction, we wanted to do something a little bit different, and we wanted to try out. I wanted to try out this co-hosted format because you were quite new to podcasting at the time, and you were a little bit nervous and wanted. What's the right phrase? A little bit of hand-holding, I suppose, is the right phrase. And it gave us an opportunity to try out this co-hosted idea. And we had pre-recorded like 12 interviews with podcasters, hadn't we? We'd recorded these 12 full interviews, and we had no idea what we were going to do with them. We just recorded them. I just interviewed a whole bunch of friends that I know in the podcasting space. Learned a lot from doing it. And we were like, so we had that content, we had those 12 episodes, and we're like, well, what could we do? Well, we could do a traditional sort of just release it as an interview style podcast. But then we were like, well, and we were toying around at the time with doing a podcast for one of our companies, Vegetology, which hopefully we're going to get done this year, he says. And so we were thinking about these different formats. And so this co-hosted format was something that we'd not done, and we thought actually this could be a really interesting way to do it, because chatting away is something that we do quite easily, and it also, I think, helped you at the start with the podcasting thing because you've got somebody there with you, and it gave us a chance to try a new format. So that, in my head, I mean, it was a long time ago, I could have completely messed that up.
No, that is where it all started. And I think one of the things, how we ended up doing it with having a full-length conversation and then taking segments out of it. The whole idea was to break it, to dissect it a bit and pull out actionable advice, pull out deeper insights, and to talk about them.
Yes.
And create a better learning experience for us and for our listeners.
And it's been a really interesting experiment, hasn't it? I've really enjoyed it, mainly because, and again, the listeners won't know this, but you may have picked it up, I don't know. I just literally rock up to the studio like once every couple of weeks. We batch out a few episodes. I just sit here. I get to listen to the clips because you actually do the interviews as well now. I don't do those. I just rabbit on for like 20 minutes and that's my job done. It's the easiest podcast in the world, right? And so it's been really, for me, very interesting and very easy as a podcast. Mind you, that said, I say I rock up to the studio. I'd always have to spend half an hour setting the studio up.
Yes, I thought we were going to gloss over that part, but that's okay. That's okay.
So what episode is this? Like 786 or something?
No, I think it is.
We're in the 70s, aren't we? I think 60s or 70s.
69 or 71.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So we have done that many episodes. And today I said, is the studio ready to you? And you were like, yes. It just wasn't.
It was about 98% of the way ready. Let's go with that.
Yeah, let's not go with that. Anyway.
No.
But apart from the fact that you're still learning how to set the studio up, it was stupid easy for me to do it, if that makes sense. And that's why partly I enjoyed it. I enjoy talking about podcasting, and I enjoyed the insane ease for me, but I don't think it was as easy for you.
Which part are we talking about?
The podcast, this sort of co-hosted format.
It wasn't easy for me in what sense?
As
what
in, are you just listening to me, or are you just going off in Streamline? I plead the fifth. As in the workload. So for me, the workload was, apart from setting up the studio and chatting away for 20 minutes. But for you, the workload was a lot more involved with the co-hosted format.
There was more to it. I didn't just have the privilege of rocking up and just talking away for 20 minutes, Matt. There was a bit more work that went into it before and after, which wasn't a problem. I think the reason that we have decided to make the change, we wanted to evolve the purpose a little bit more to align it with the rest of what Podjunction is doing. Mm-hmm. So we are where we were breaking down conversations into actionable insights, we are we're evolving it so that we are having those conversations with the CEOs, business leaders, and entrepreneurs that we were having before, but we're making it more high level rather than granular. So in our segments, we went quite granular, didn't we? And talk about
very deep.
Yeah. And so keeping it more high level so that we are able to talk about their strategies. We're able to talk about their long-term vision of what they want to do with the podcast. So that's where that came from.
Yeah. So, yes, that was the reason to drive the thinking behind the change.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the fact you didn't like to do all the work.
Yeah.
But that was a part of it.
No, that didn't matter so much. I think from me, I didn't feel that we were actually helping. We weren't actually helping or aligning this part of our podcast, so the co-hosted bit, wasn't aligning itself really well with what we were trying to achieve with Podjunction as a whole.
Yeah.
So I felt that it was a bit disjointed and we needed to bring the two closer together.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things about podcasting is it never stays the same. It always kind of evolves. It morphs as you try different ideas and different things. Which I fully embrace and love actually about podcasting is it doesn't have to sort of stay where it is, and you can move on, you can develop, you can do other things.
It's like any marketing tool, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like
it is.
you move with the audience, you move with the business goals.
Yeah, you do.
You don't
And the
stay.
thing that I like about what you're saying, because and again, full disclosure, just being totally transparent here, this is nothing to do with me.
No, it's nothing to do with you.
It genuinely isn't, and I quite like that. This is all driven by you taking a much more vested interest in Podjunction as a company, wanting to drive that forward, and you've looked at the whole thing and gone, I don't think this thing aligns. We need to make this better. I really like that. I think that's really cool. I think that's really awesome that you felt like I joke about I got sacked from Podjunction, but that's exactly what I'm going to put everywhere.
Of course.
I'm going to put this on LinkedIn. And the reason why I joke is my company.
Yeah.
So I get sacked. But I love it. And I think it's awesome that you're doing it this way. And I think if you're in podcasting, to have that level of ownership, to not be afraid to make big decisions because you don't think that what you're doing is aligning with what you want it to be at this current moment in time. And I think that's quite brave. I think that it's going to be quite an interesting outcome, to see what the outcome of doing this is. But at the same time, I hats off to you for doing it. I think it's really cool. And I think that alignment is so key to podcasting. If you want to use your podcast to grow a business, the very overused word of alignment, I need to align, then pivot. That's another overused word. Pivot and ping. We could go through all the old overused words. Anyway, But I think it's a really important thing to understand what it is you stand for, to understand what it is you're trying to do with the podcast that you have, and not being afraid to make course corrections along the way, even if it means telling the boss you're no longer doing the podcast. Love it. I had to get that in there.
Yes.
You are fired. Which is why I started out the podcast by saying I was fired. Not that I'm bitter.
No. He's just going to miss setting up, I know.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. But I am thinking in my head, well, I've got this space. Should I set up another podcast? In fact, before we started, going off tangent here, before we started this one, we were looking at the Talkville podcast. Yes. Which is, if you're a fan of the TV show Smallville, there is a podcast by Michael Rosenbaum and Tom Welling, who played Lex Luthor and Clark Kent. They do a podcast talking about the episodes of Smallville. Now, we can wax lyrical about whether Smallville is actually a decent program or not. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But that's another story. But it wasn't until like 3 or 4 weeks ago I came across this podcast by accident called Talkville, where they talk about the episodes of Smallville, and I just find it fascinating. But we were looking at his studio. Yeah. And we were like, oh, we like that. He's got couches rather than the table, and it's a little bit more relaxed. I'm thinking, we could change the studio. We could do the couch thing, go much more conversational, chatty type thing. And
it looks really cool.
It does look really cool. I really like his studio. I thought he was doing a good job, the way it was set out, but a very different vibe to the one that we have.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digressed. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I'm supposed to be following the points on the whiteboard, and I think I've completely messed it up. Why we started the co-hosted episode.
Okay, Matt, you're too far behind. Okay,
what we loved about it.
You go first. This will be fun.
Okay, back on track, Matt. This is another reason why you don't want me involved. I just keep taking everything off piece, don't I? That's okay. So what did we love about the co-hosted thing? I think, like I said, for me, the fact that it was just so easy, because really you did all the work. And I say that with a mixture of jest. I jest about the studio. It takes 10 minutes, but that's about it. But actually, I did nothing apart from the interviews at the start and getting the show up and running with you. So I love the fact it was easy. I loved the thing about co-hosted like this, like we have conversations, it's just insane amounts of banter. Now, if you don't like banter, don't do the co-hosted show. But I like that bouncy. I like banter. I like the fact that you and I are in the same studio. Doing interviews with people online is great, but doing that same interview in a studio is so much better because you're with someone in person. So I like the fact that we're together in the studio. I think that's worked super, super well, especially when you use your microphone, right? Yes. And I can hear you. It's always a big if. You never know.
You never know.
But I think it's worked really well with that. And I like the idea that it's not really an idea. I like the reality of what actually happened was we'd talk about an idea and we'd bounce off each other a little bit. And there'd be that going back and forth. And it's like, yeah, but and you'd think about something from a producer's side of the equation. And I'd think about something from the host side of the equation. And occasionally we'd talk about it from the guest side of the equation, having been a guest on podcasts. So as a format, genuinely, I really like it. I do think it is a bit more talk showy. I don't know. I don't know if I would do it having done it now. I don't know if I would take EP, the e-commerce podcast down this road. I would, if I was going to do it, I maybe would go down the road that Awesome has done, the Awesome Marketing podcast where there's 4 of them. So it's a bit more of a panel rather than a co-host. But I think certainly for something like Rooted, the podcast we're thinking of doing vegetology, I think certainly for those conversational ones, talking about news or latest topics or talking about a sport or something like that, I think this co-hosted stuff is just really easy. Yeah,
it's quite entertaining, isn't it? It has a different flavor to it.
Well, that's going back to what our last guest, Jason Green, was talking about. He said you need to educate and entertain. And I think this format is quite an entertaining format.
Yeah.
What have you loved about it?
For me, I've enjoyed the process. So having had the full conversation with the guest and then taking out the segments and I'm going over the same stuff and then we're talking about it, I feel like I've been able to pull out so much more by instead of just having the one conversation, because not everything is going to sink in, right? Yeah. But when you're pulling it all apart, there's so much more in there than you realize. at first.
Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed the learning process. I think it's been really fun. And like you said, bouncing ideas off of each other. And then even like there's been times when we're like, oh, we should definitely try this, or we should definitely go away and do this and apply it.
Yeah.
So as much as we're trying to help our listeners, we're actually doing a lot of that for ourselves, aren't we?
Because you produce all our show, all my podcasts you produce. And so when an idea does come up, it is genuinely like, oh, let's just do that. You know, and that comes up on the fly. And I think outside of this format, we wouldn't have had that conversation.
That's right. Yeah.
Which I think is going to be quite interesting how that works going forward. You know, how do we implement stuff that we learn? I don't know, but but I think we have implemented a whole bunch of stuff based on the conversations that you and I have after listening to these clips.
Yeah. And the other thing I've loved is the laughter. That has been a lot of fun.
It's always good to laugh.
It is.
Laugh or cry. Laughter is definitely better. But no, I think you're right. I think it has been good fun. I do like it like I say, I do like it as a format. It's definitely something that I will remember and think actually going forward, if I can, I think the other thing about when you do an interview style podcast, which is how most podcasts are, right? You have an interview. And so actually, I assume you're going to talk about this, but that's what Podjunction is going to become more now, isn't it? It's actually you and the guest talking. And so, you know, we've taken the guest, we've created 4 or 5 weeks worth of, 3 or 4 weeks worth of content out of that one guest, which is another cool thing about the co-hosted. The way we've done it is you get a lot of content from one interview. So you're going to move more into that. What you'll find is, and I know you'll find it anyway, because you're already doing the interviews and I do an interview style podcast, is you have to be totally present for that whole conversation. Yeah. Because the quality of that podcast predominantly is on you as the host asking interesting questions. And if you can do that, you'll have a good show. Whereas in the co-hosted show, you could have a pretty mediocre kind of interview. As long as you've got 1 or 2 things from the guests which are interesting, you can cut them out. And if we'd have done just that, if we'd have just had really mediocre interviews, cut out some really interesting bits from the guests, and then done this, no one would have ever known. Do you see what I mean? And so you'll find with the interview style podcast, the pressure is much more on you to make sure that those podcasts are good, that they're interesting. You've got to be much more, and I'm not saying that you weren't into it, and I'm not saying that you were not focused on the conversation, because I think you were, but I think it's just another one of those things where this type of format has a certain style of benefit over something like the interview style podcast. You can be a little bit more laid back because there's 2 of you. You can bounce off each other. You can rely on each other in that sense. So that's why going back to the question, that's why we loved it. That's why it's one of the few things.
Made it easier, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. So what's the next question? Why the change? Well, you've mentioned that. Evolving the purpose. Dun, dun, dun. That sounds like a book title.
A book title?
Yeah, Evolving the Purpose.
I thought you said buck at first, sorry. What?
This is where that accent thing. Would you like me to talk like this?
No.
Would you like me to talk like this?
No.
We'll just go around all the world accents. Just stick with the one you've got, Edmundson.
I've gotten used to that one.
Obviously not. You just misheard what I said.
Yeah, that is true. Never mind. I take that back.
So, book title, Evolving the Purpose.
Yeah. So I think our audience and the people that we're trying to serve have are looking for a more focused conversation. And that's the main reason for going to just a single conversation, moving to a single length conversation and talking more higher level, as I said before. So talking about what challenges have you found in your journey? What's that been like? Where do you see yourself heading with the podcast, with the business? How do they support each other? Those kinds of questions. Yeah.
Very good. So streamlining the process.
Yeah. So that's where you were talking about like the extra workload. It'll be a lot less. Yeah.
In some respects, yes. It will be a lot less, as in you've not got to, because you spend a long time preparing the clips to talk about on the show. So you are not going to have that. But because you are going to keep the show weekly, or is it going to every other week?
Weekly is what I'm aiming for, yeah.
So you're going to keep the show weekly. And so instead of doing one interview for every 3 weeks, you've now got to do 3 interviews.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the time saving is going to be any different, because you're going to just, that time you were saving, you're now going to still be interviewing.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of streamlining the process actually makes sense. So the time might not be that different, but actually the whole process is a lot easier, because you record the interview and it just goes into our production process rather than record the interview. It goes into a separate process. We've got to get the clips. We've got to record the podcast. Then that goes into the production process. So you're taking out a lot of complexity, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
So I can see why streamlining the process. Do you think, it doesn't say this on the screen, on the whiteboard, but do you think the outcome of the changes you want to make are going to create a better podcast? I know it's an obvious question. You have to say yes, because if you say no, I'm going to go, why? But why? Is it going to create a better podcast, and why?
Yes, because I think that it will better align, there's your word, because I'm going to pivot.
And ping.
It's going to better align with what our audience or the people that we're trying to serve are needing.
The paradigm.
The paradigm. You need another P coming. There's another P coming up somewhere.
I'm just going to think of all these overused words. The paradigm.
Yeah, I think it'll fit better with what they want and what Podjunction is trying to do.
Yeah.
As a podcasting service.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So it says there, aligns with Podjunction goals. I think this is what it says, because this is your writing.
Which are.
That's an arrow. Is that what that means? Yeah,
that's in my head. That's what that means. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So aligns with Podjunction goals, which are something business use. What does that?
Okay, can I do this part?
Yeah, I'm butchering it.
So all of this aligns with.
This is a real reason Matt's not allowed back on the show. With
our Podjunction goals, which are to help businesses use podcasting to grow their business in more meaningful ways.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
So the big question then, we've talked about the things that we liked about co-hosting. What did you not like about it? Because that's not on your board.
When Matt would butcher what I'm trying to say. And when Matt would make fun of me.
Every episode of the podcast. You get me plenty of material. That's the problem.
I know. No, actually, I don't care about that at all. But no, I don't. There wasn't that much that I didn't like about it. I really enjoyed it. I just don't think that it was doing what we wanted it to do. And I think we were, it was a lot of fun, but we were wasting some of that.
Yeah, wasting a little bit of time and energy, I suppose. Creativity.
So I think we just need to channel all of that in a different direction.
Because the paradigm is not
because of the paradigm.
Yeah. It's and this is a really interesting point. If you're doing something like a passion project, this would have been totally fine. If it was just like a total passion thing, it would have been fine. But because we are trying to get it to align better with what Podjunction's doing, which in effect is what Podjunction says to all its clients, right? So you're taking your own medicine in many ways. Yeah. You wanted to get it better to align. There is a finite amount of time, so we need to spend that wisely, and we need to think about how we do that well.
Yeah.
Whereas with something like a passion project, it doesn't really matter as much. You can just do it because you want to do it. And so it's a really important point. Really important point. Okay, so what can listeners expect?
So, as we talked about before, single conversations with our guests and more high-level strategy types of conversations, as I said before, challenges where they see growth, what their vision is, that kind of thing. So more high-level. And so that would be the topic and focus. And I think, in essence, to remember is that we are still very much the same. The heart of the podcast is still the same. So we're still showcasing how businesses can use podcasting as a a tool for growth for the business. That's still the heart of it. We're just changing the format.
Just changing
slightly.
the format to better suit the audience that we're trying to reach with Podjunction and who we connect with and who we serve, which I think is a great phrase. I think if we were an agency that was serving every single podcaster, do you know what I mean? Then the show format we had would have made a bit more sense. Yeah,
for sure.
But the way you're trying to grow it and the way you're trying to develop it makes total sense with the alignment. Now, that said, I think if you're a listener to the show and you're a podcaster, I don't know, a gaming podcaster, let's just pick a random thing. Are you still going to get value out of it?
Yeah. If you are a CEO, a business leader, an entrepreneur wanting to grow your business using podcasting as that tool, that vehicle, then yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Very good. So stay listening. Stay tuned. Okay, so are there any questions on there that I've not asked?
No.
What's staying
I think
the
we've
same?
covered it.
Oh, we've covered it all, haven't we?
Yeah.
So let me ask you some questions then. How long are the new episodes going to be? Do you know yet?
About 30 minutes.
Okay, so you're going to have shorter conversations.
Shorter conversations.
And is there going to be more than one conversation per guest?
No.
Okay.
Just the one.
Just the one?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So definitely stay tuned for that. And it's still going to be a weekly podcast?
Yeah. Weekly podcast. About half the time, like so 30 minutes. I guess the same length as these co-hosted ones.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. Speaking of time, how long have we been going already? 29 minutes, 14 seconds. Check that out.
Although some of that was before I actually
Oh, before you actually got serious. Yeah.
Yes.
Normally what happens, and again, you can't see this unless Josh creates like some kind of outtakes thing, is we hit the record button and it takes you a few minutes to sort of center yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And eventually you just go, right, okay. And then you're off.
Sometimes. And then I'm like, are we actually recording, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I find very funny. Well, listen, from me to you, I hope the new show goes well.
Thank you.
I hope the new format goes well. It'll be interesting to see it. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely a subscriber. Thank you for firing me.
I'll have you on as a guest. You can talk about EP.
Geez, thanks.
You're welcome. So you can, not miss me too much.
Reminisce.
Yes.
We can reminisce about the old days.
Yeah.
But no, like I said, I think it's brave. I think it's a great move. I think it's actually just a really good lesson for everybody that's podcasting out there, just to take a breath and just go, is this still right? What do I need to do to pivot, to realign, to make sure the paradigm is correct? And if you need any help, just ping us an email.
Yeah. We will pivot and see what we can do for you.
Okay.
But no, this is definitely not a goodbye. It's just a new chapter.
It's au revoir. Have you heard that in the movies? This is not goodbye. It's just au revoir.
No. Don't know what movies you've been watching.
I can't remember where that line's from. Somebody will tell me, I'm sure. But yes. So, well, thank you, everybody, for letting me be part of your lives for the last 70 episodes. And yeah, I will see you at some point, no doubt. But you'll be back next week.
I will be back next week, yeah.
Have you got a guest lined up? I
do.
I don't believe her either. So hopefully Sadaf will be back next week. But from me to everybody, thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the future. But that's it.
Too.
All the best. Bye for now.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode at Podjunction. If you've enjoyed the insights from this episode and want to hear the full conversation with today's special guest, don't forget to visit podjunction.com, where you'll find more information about how you can join Podjunction cohort. Whether you listened while on the go or in a quiet moment, thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Remember, every episode is a chance to gain insights and to transform your business with podcasting. So keep on tuning in, keep on learning, and until next time, happy podcasting.